I am going to open this one on a March morning in the year 1868, on the fitting-out dock of a shipbuilding yard called Vale, on the Rhode Island coast. At the precise moment a titled English lord made the most costly mistake of his life, and the most fortunate, though it would be the better part of a fortnight before he understood that, and a considerable amount of mortification in between. His name was Lord Edmund Ashworth, Viscount Blackmere, and he had crossed an ocean to court an heiress he had never met. He came up the gravel drive in a hired trap, salt wind pulling at his coat, and saw first the long gray sheds of the shipyard, ribs of half-built hulls rising against the sky like the bones of something enormous. And then, nearer on the dock itself, a young woman in a canvas coat and rolled shirt sleeves, crouched over a set of hull drawings weighted down with iron bolts against the wind, a carpenter's pencil behind her ear, calling measurements up to a man in the rigging above her with the flat, unbothered authority of someone who has done this 1,000 times. I want you to look at her carefully. Lord Blackmere did not. He gave her the glance a travel-worn man gives a person he has already filed away, a draftsman, perhaps, or a foreman's assistant, and he walked toward her with the easy certainty of a man who has never had to wonder whether anyone would do as he asked. You there, he said, not unkindly, just certain, the way the well-born so often are. I'm looking for Miss Marrow. I have business with the owner. The woman rolled up her drawings without hurrying. Of course, she said. I'll see to it directly. Now hold that moment with me. The gulls over the yard, the smell of tar and fresh-cut oak. Lord Blackmere already turning back toward his trap, certain his errand is handled. Because what he has just done is ask Eleanor Marrow to go and fetch herself. She owns the yard. Every keel laid, every contract with the Navy, every acre of timber lot behind the sheds, hers inherited outright from her father 2 years past, over the objections of 2 uncles who thought a shipyard no place for a woman's name on the deed. And she has just told an English lord, standing in her own yard in her own coat, that she will see to it directly. She means it, and she is already deciding exactly what she intends to see to. If you've been with me before, you know what's coming. Hit subscribe now so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. I always have another one waiting. Here is who she actually was. Eleanor Marrow was 29, and she had run Vale since her father's death, in practice since long before that, since she was 16 and started correcting the foreman's arithmetic. Her father had left her the yard outright, with a letter to his brothers that said, in full, she can read a set of lines better than either of you, and I will not hand a business to a man simply because he was born one. She dressed for the work most days, because you cannot climb a scaffold in silk, and she had decided years ago she'd rather be useful in the wrong clothes than decorative in the right ones. And for 2 years they had come, the suitors, the second sons, the charming men with old names and thin bank accounts, all of them arriving with excellent manners and a very particular interest in her contracts with the Navy Yard. She'd gotten fast at spotting the moment a man's questions drifted from her to her ledgers. She wasn't bitter. She was simply certain she could never know, not really, whether a man wanted her or the thing behind her. Then Lord Blackmere's letter had come. Correct, civil, entirely transparent. She'd nearly declined. Instead, she did something she'd never done before. She told her household that when Lord Blackmere arrived, Miss Marrow would be unavoidably occupied at the Providence office for a week, unable to receive him, but that the yard's junior draftsman, a Miss Nell, would see he was shown around and made comfortable. Her foreman had looked at her for a long moment and simply nodded, which from him was as good as applause. Let's see, she thought, watching Blackmere's trap roll up the drive, what you're made of when you think no one who matters is watching. Before I let them get on with it, you should know the truth about Lord Blackmere, because it isn't what Eleanor assumed, and the gap between what she assumed and what was true is the whole engine of this story. Edmund Ashworth had come to America to marry money. That is the plain fact, and he was under no illusion about it, and it had been making him sick since Liverpool. His father had died 4 years prior, leaving him a title, a beautiful crumbling estate in Kent, and a mountain of debt beneath it that the family solicitor described, with studied restraint, as requiring immediate remedy. Edmund had spent those 4 years trying. He'd sold what could be sold, run the home farm himself, cut the household to a third its size. It hadn't been enough. You must marry money, my lord. I am sorry. It is the simple truth. A younger sister without a dowry. A mother with nowhere else in the world to be. A name, a connection had been suggested. Miss Eleanor Marrow of Rhode Island, unmarried, independently wealthy, owner of a shipbuilding concern. The sort of woman, the solicitor implied, who might welcome a title, given the passage of years. Edmund had written his letter, made the crossing, told himself he would be attentive, correct, everything required, and that he would then spend the rest of his life performing a feeling he did not have, for a woman who would never know she'd been deceived. It sat in him like a swallowed stone. He was not, underneath it, a dishonest man. That was the particular misery of it. That is who asked the draftsman in the canvas coat to fetch her employer. Not a villain, a decent man at the worst crossroads of his life, so sick with what he'd come to do that he barely looked the yard in the eye. Which is exactly why he hadn't looked carefully at her at all. Consider the trap that's just been set. Edmund believed he'd have to perform carefully for Miss Marrow. But the woman in the canvas coat, she was nobody. A draftsman, the sort of person a man could speak to without armor, because what could it possibly matter what he said to the help? He found her again the next morning in the drafting shed, hull plans spread under lamplight. "Good morning, my lord. You keep early hours." "I sleep poorly," he said, and hadn't meant to say anything at all. There was a directness in her that unsettled him pleasantly. No flutter, no performance. She spoke to him like an equal, showed him the lines of a hull under construction, argued with him correctly about ballast weight. He came back the next morning, and the one after. Because she was nobody, she was the only honest place in Rhode Island. He didn't ask about his title. She talked about keels and Navy contracts and a dispute over a delivery schedule, and she talked about them as if she fully expected he'd have something useful to say, which 5 hard years of estate management later he did. On the 4th morning she beat him soundly at whist. On the 5th he told her about his sister. On the 6th, leaning against the drafting table while she checked a set of calculations, he told her the worst of it. "I have come here to marry a woman I've never met," he said to the window, to the gray harbor beyond it. "For her money. That is the whole of it. I am to be charming and let her believe I am drawn to her, when I know nothing about her except what my family needs her to be." The pencil in her hand had gone still. "I told myself men have done worse for less. That's true. But the thing I cannot get past, the stone I cannot put down, is that she will believe herself loved. And it will not be true. And she will never know it. I will know it every single morning for the rest of my life." Eleanor Marrow had gone very quiet, because in 2 years of drawing-room performances and men studying her yard from behind polite smiles, she had never once been in the presence of a man confessing, to someone he believed was nobody, that what he couldn't stomach was the deception of her. Not the loss of the fortune, the deception of the woman who wouldn't know. "Perhaps," she said carefully, to her drawings, "you might consider telling her the truth." He laughed, short and worn. "And lose my sister's future in a single sentence. Honesty is a luxury I've worked out I can't afford. And if she'd prefer your honesty to your performance, then she'd be a woman in 1,000, and I've no evidence such a woman exists." What followed was 10 more days of the same. Hull plans, arguments about ballast, whist in the evenings. She stopped letting the games go easy on herself around day 4 and found she still won. He stopped thinking about Miss Marrow entirely and started thinking, with real alarm, about the draftsman with graphite on her fingers. And Eleanor, who had begun this whole business with the cold intention of studying a fortune hunter until she understood exactly what he was, had stopped studying somewhere she couldn't quite name. She had a problem. It was getting very large. It came to a head on a Thursday evening, the shed gone quiet, the harbor turning the color of pewter through the window. "I need to tell you something," Edmund said. He was looking at the lamp, not at her. She'd learned that meant it would cost him. "I came here to marry a fortune. You know that. And I find I cannot do it. Not because I'm too good for it, I've made it fairly clear I'm not, but because somewhere between the ballast calculations and being beaten at whist, I have done the one thing I had no right to do." He looked at her directly. "I have fallen in love with a shipyard draftsman who charges me nothing and gives me everything. I know exactly what it costs, my sister, the estate, all of it. And I find I am choosing this anyway. I am going to tell Miss Marrow the truth when she returns, and release her from any expectation. And then I am going to ask you, A man arriving in one disgrace and leaving in another, whether you might have him. Eleanor set down her pencil. Her hand was not quite steady because this man, who had confessed to her, believing she was nobody, exactly what he'd come to do to her, was now knowingly giving up the thing he'd crossed an ocean for, believing she had nothing. She had to stop him before he sacrificed one more thing for a poverty that didn't exist. Edmund. She hadn't used his name before. His expression shifted at the sound of it. Before you say anything else, there's something I have to tell you, and you're going to be angry, and you'll have every right to be. He waited. I am not a draftsman, she said. There is no Miss Nell. I am Eleanor Marrow. This is my yard. Those are my contracts. I have known who you were since you stepped out of that trap, and I let you believe otherwise for 11 days while you said every true thing you had in you to a woman you thought couldn't possibly matter. It was a wicked thing to do, and I have known it every day, and I could not seem to stop, and I am sorry. He went very still. She watched him walk back through every morning of it. Every confession, replaying now with the knowledge of exactly who had been listening. You knew, he said slowly, every time I told you what I despised about coming here. I was confessing it to the person I'd come to do it to. Yes. And when I told you the lie was the thing I couldn't stomach, you were the lie. Yes. Her voice stayed even, though nothing in her felt even. All of it. I have no defense except the truth. I was tired of being wanted for the yard and nothing else. And I did something cowardly and called it caution. And somewhere around the fourth morning it stopped being caution, and I didn't know how to undo it. I didn't know how until just now, when you were about to ruin yourself for a woman you thought had nothing. I couldn't let you do that. She stood. You wanted to know if any of it was real. Here's the only answer I have. What you said in this room, your sister, the estate, the lie you couldn't carry, it was real because you said it to someone you believed couldn't matter. You said it to nobody. And just now you offered to give up everything, believing I owned nothing but a set of drafting pencils. I have spent 2 years certain I could never know whether a man wanted me or my father's yard. You have just answered that question beyond any argument either of us could make, because you chose me when you believed I had nothing. I was there. I watched you do it. Edmund Ashworth stood very still in the lamplight, the harbor moving against the pilings outside. You have, he said finally, by the most infuriating method imaginable, arranged it so I cannot possibly be a fortune hunter. Yes. And the woman I chose, believing she had nothing, turns out to be the very fortune I came here for. Yes. So we are, she said, the only two people on this coast who can be entirely certain, both of us at once, that we are wanted for ourselves. He was quiet a long moment. I am angry, he said. I want to be honest about that. You should be. And I am also, he said, trying rather hard to stay angry, and finding the arithmetic keeps getting in the way. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time without her title laid over the top of her. I came to this coast to make a stranger believe I loved her. Somewhere in these drawings I stopped performing anything at all, and you watched it happen. And now you tell me the woman I stopped performing for is the very fortune I came to perform for. That, he said, is the most inconvenient love story I have ever heard. She crossed the shed and took his hand, ink and graphite on her fingers. Marry me, he said, not the yard, not the contracts. You, the impossible, sharp-eyed woman who beat me at whist and let me make a fool of myself for 11 days and handed me back my own honesty by the worst possible method. I'd have taken you without a shilling, and we both know it now. Eleanor Marrow, who had spent 2 years being wanted for everything except herself, said yes on one condition. He owed her, she informed him, for 11 days of consultation, and she did not extend credit indefinitely. He laughed the way a man laughs when he finally sets something down he's been carrying a long way. They were married that autumn, before the harbor iced. His sister was dowered. The estate in Kent was saved, and Edmund always said, and meant it, that he'd have let it go without a backward glance for the woman in the drafting shed. Eleanor said she knew it, which was exactly why she never made him prove it twice. They ran Marrow Vale together for the rest of their lives, and to the end of her days, the new Lady Blackmere kept a canvas coat on a hook by the drafting table, and a habit of being mistaken for staff, which she found, every single time, funnier than the last. You've sat with me through a disguise, a confession, and a courtship that arrived, as the good ones do, entirely sideways. If it's left you with anything, a little warmth, the small courage of remembering that being truly seen is possible even after you've stopped looking for it. Subscribe before you go. Costs nothing, and it means I can find you the moment the next one is ready. And if you won't, well, you know by now how patient I am about what I'm owed. Good night. And do mind, won't you, how quickly you assume you know who you're speaking to.